go. Looks like, oh, I need to turn my light on. There we go. That's better. All right, it looks like we're live. So you're Spartan Theology, correct? You run a YouTube channel called Spartan Theology. Thanks for coming on and being willing to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, so my channel is called Spartan Theology. My name's Ethan. You can call me whatever, Spartan, Ethan, whatever you want. But
Bob.
yeah, so I've been a Christian for a little over 3 years now. It's about to be 4. And so when I first became I grew up Catholic, whatever, fell away, and then the past 3 years, I've been a Christian. So once I came back to the faith, I started watching a lot of apologetics and whatnot on YouTube. Found this whole like debate community, basically wanted to be a part of it, so I started a small channel. That's essentially the story of my channel. It's not really an apologetics channel. The more I learn about apologetics, the more like flaws I'm really seeing in like the whole methodology, basically. So it's just more of just sharing what I'm studying and joining in the conversation.
Cool. So I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe there are no reasons to believe in a God. Could you tell me like what reasons you believe there are for belief in a God? And I'd like to tell you my thoughts on those positions, and then we can just chat about anything, pretty much.
Yeah, so basically, like I was thinking about this chat, and while I'm enjoying studying the philosophical arguments and all these different things and seeing where they go, I'm not super knowledgeable, and it would be a lie to say, I became a Christian because of the Kalam cosmological argument or anything like that. That's
Yeah.
definitely not why I became a Christian. So thinking more towards like why I believe, it's really like it really rings true, like the whole properly basic reformed epistemology type thing as far as God goes. So I just basically have always believed that there was a God, and the philosophical arguments I see some that I don't think work, but it still seems to me like overall it could be a reasonable belief to believe there is a God. And then as far as Christianity goes, it's more just the story of the Bible like really rings true. And so, I mean, as far as historical evidence, I don't think you can really. I'm not a minimal facts type guy. I don't think I'm going to try and prove the resurrection with history or anything like that. But it's more of just a story that rings true to me. So I like to share my truth and, test it and see where it goes from there. I'm not. I
So you
wouldn't consider
mentioned,
myself like a fideist or whatever. I don't know exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like I'm learning all these terms and stuff and really fleshing out my beliefs. But
yeah, so
if
you
any of that
mentioned
makes sense.
properly basic belief. What do you mean by properly basic?
Just seems like something that from like when I read about properly basic to me it just sounds like something that you can be justified without any like real outside evidence, more of just it. I believe it seems true, and without any defeaters I'm reasonable in believing in that thing.
So do you think that's true of all religions?
No, no, well, I mean I think it could be as far as like your justification for like starting your belief or whatever you could. And I think that really goes towards just God, like just to believe that there is a God. I don't know about, you could say like properly basic to believe in Christianity. I feel like that's taking it too far.
Right. So I've done quite a bit of research into properly basic. One I think of the better resources is the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And one of the common criticisms of properly basic beliefs is that it applies to anything. Like people who grow up in Jamaica and believe in voodoo as just a fundamental part of reality is like the fundamental nature of reality. They're justified in having a properly basic belief in voodoo using the same epistemology, the reformed epistemology of Alvin Plantinga. And that's one of the common criticisms against properly basic belief. Do you think that if it can be reasonable to believe anything just because your culture tells you so, do you think that's a good epistemology?
As far as like good epistemology, like I don't, yeah, like that's where it, like where I was thinking about this today, where it really, because as far as good, I mean, I didn't consider that before believing in God. I just like look back, like, why do I believe that there is a God? And it just seems like something that I always believed, and it just seems reasonable that someone could like I feel like there's a God. I can look into it, and then that's where I think all these arguments come in, and whether or not they prove me wrong or the concept of a God is incoherent, something along those lines. But it's really tough. I'm really trying to understand. Like epistemology is something I know you focus on a lot, and it's something I've yet to dive into. It seems like just a can of worms that doesn't seem like very much fun to first start out. But
Yeah, for
so it's
sure.
just really tough. Yeah. Maybe we can keep going with questions or something.
Yeah, so from my position, I think I like fideism. I think fideism is a reasonable position. Fideism is the position that the only way to know about God is through revelation or faith. And so it's essentially granting the fact that there is no real good evidences. There's no like way to indicate God through arguments or science or anything like that. It's just based off of faith and revelation. And if that position I'm okay with. Like if you're not claiming that there is this actual evidence out there in the world that can demonstrate objectively there is a God like you can for other things that we grant are real, then I'm okay with that as a position. But if you're claiming that there's something else, like the properly basic beliefs, I disagree with because that says that it's reasonable to believe based off of this methodology that has been presented, and this methodology doesn't work. It's not a good methodology. If you just want to believe because you choose to, you have feelings, that's totally fine. But if you think there's an actual methodology, like the scientific methodology, that can indicate a God exists and make it justified, that's what I disagree with. That's why I don't agree with properly basic belief. So would your position lean more towards the fact that properly basic belief is a good methodology for discovering truth about the world, or just more towards the fideistic belief of I choose to believe because I feel it and that's good enough?
Yeah, I think like more towards the fideistic. Like I've heard about like I said, I haven't studied Reformed epistemology or probably basic enough to like really say that's where I stand. It's just more of like when I was really thinking about what back to why I believe, it just seems like what I would call properly basic, but I probably shouldn't even really use that term, like because that obviously entails a whole I've implanted a
Yeah.
whole thing or whatever, and that's not necessarily what I'm referring to. It's just it seems like something like I seem like I can tell, and maybe like I said, epistemology is a tough thing because it almost seems like I can tell when like a belief I have is like something that I should really look into more, and then there's other beliefs I have that are just like this seems correct to me. So I guess it is more fideistic than anything. It's just more like this seems really correct. I don't see any reason not to believe it, so I'm gonna keep going until and see where it leads me. I'm not completely stuck in my mind. I would definitely wouldn't say I'm 100% sure that God exists, but it seems really unlikely to me that He doesn't exist. It seems like a lot of things in the world would make a lot less sense. But yeah, I don't know.
Like what? Like what would make less sense if there wasn't a God?
It just seems like when I like so as far as just like it just seems like there needs to be something. That's like my belief that there.
We agree. I agree there has to be something. Like if nothing existed, it would make it really hard for me to exist. That would be difficult.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty true. I exist at least.
Yeah, so I agree there has to be some fundamental nature of reality that has to be like eternal or all powerful or have some kind of omni property in that sense. But I don't see any reason to think it's a God. Like I don't see anything that adding a consciousness to that makes something make more sense. I don't see that at all.
And that's where I think like the whole story of Jesus and Christian just the whole Christian whatever religion just like it rings true in my heart in just a way that nothing else ever did. So like the fact that it feels like there's a necessary part of reality, and then the fact that Christianity feels so true to me, those things seem to line up so well that I've kind of just like in the very beginning, like more than likely, I feel like I just kind of went with it. Like it felt right, so I went with it, and then it just has gotten solider and solider in my mind.
Yeah, that
So I
makes
don't
sense.
really.
Like if you already believe Christianity and you think there needs to be a necessary thing, oh well, that could be explained by Christianity. Like that's perfectly reasonable. But you said you didn't have any like you didn't think there were any like defeaters or challenges to Christianity. Like what is your take on the problem of suffering? Like if there was an all good, all powerful God, it seems like he would have created a world without like involuntary suffering. He wouldn't have forced people to suffer without their consent. And obviously they do. That seems to me to be a really good argument against God.
No, I totally agree. I think the problem of evil is basically the toughest objection to Christianity and just theism in general, for sure. I don't know why some Christians brush it off as like, oh, just skeptical theism. That one like blows my mind. Like, I agree that we probably can't find an answer to every instance of suffering or whatever, and I don't think that's what you're claiming. If like we knew why 99.9% of suffering, we couldn't find this one reason, then that wouldn't really be a good, but that's not what you're saying or most atheists are saying. It's just a bigger picture thing. So skeptical theism doesn't seem to answer that question. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't know if for people that know me or whatever, I have a really small channel, but I'm been on with Dry Apologist, who you had on like last week a lot, and he talks a lot about problem of evil. So we've kind of been thinking about it, and I think, like I said, I think it's a good objection, but I do think there's responses to it that have satisfied me. And I guess my like the free will defense is a big part of it. Like I think God wants relationship a free choice, people to be able to make a free choice to either be in relationship with God or not. And when you're not, that leads to sin and suffering and all these things. And I think that answers a lot of suffering, but not all of it, not the natural evil, really. I know there's ways that people try and use free will defense to point to natural evil, but I don't know. I don't quite understand that. But so I'm really trying to work through it. But I do think that so when I said no defeaters, nothing that has been convincing to me. Not that I don't think there are legitimate objections to Christianity, because I think there's a
Yeah.
ton.
So you mentioned the free will defense. So essentially, the argument is that if you have to allow suffering to allow for free will, then the fact that we have free will is a good reason for God to allow suffering. But if it was possible to have free will without suffering, do you think that argument would still be compelling?
Well, I think, yeah. So I guess like the free will defense, like you're saying that the only way to have free will is for there to be suffering. And I just think when I think of free will defense, I guess maybe I wouldn't word it that way, or maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. But I just think that, like, given the choice, if you have a free will choice, then there is always going to be a good and a bad choice. Is kind of what I'm getting at. So people make the wrong choice,
All
which
right.
leads to,
So, I mean, I wouldn't, because evil, I think, is kind of subjective. In the case of a God, you just eating fish on a Sunday or picking up sticks on a Sunday is evil based off of God's definition in the Old Testament. So instead of going off of evil, I go off of suffering. So people can still choose to do good or wrong, right or wrong, but without suffering. You don't need to have suffering there. The suffering is unnecessary. So, for example, like in my example is like if we imagine we lived in the Matrix or something, and I like threw a coffee mug at you, if we could make it so that physically the coffee mug would just pass through you like you were a ghost, like in the Matrix, like a video game character or something. So I can still choose to do evil, but it wouldn't hurt you unless you consented to it. So it seems like you can still have that free will and the choice to do good or evil, but without the suffering. So it seems
yeah,
adding in the suffering is an unnecessary evil.
yeah. I just don't know. I don't know. See, like when it gets into stuff like that, like it makes sense what you're saying. But then, like, obviously, like, it's like the whole thing. What I think of people said too, like, you go to stab somebody and the knife turns to butter or whatever. And, like, it's so hard for me to, like, really entertain that idea in my head because it just seems like ludicrous, obviously, like a coffee mug passing through me or whatever, a knife turning to butter.
Well, why
But
is that ludicrous? Because God's all powerful. I don't think that's outside of the scope of his power to be able to turn a knife to butter. I mean, we can do it in a computer game, so God should be able to do this.
yeah, and I almost just think, though, it wouldn't necessarily be like a real free choice. But then as I'm saying that, I'm like, well, I guess it really would be. Like I would be able to make it. Just seems like if I lived in a world where I knew as soon as I stabbed somebody that a knife was going to turn to butter, I'd just stab everybody I was mad at, because it doesn't really, like, I don't know. It seems like it really minimalizes your actual choices. They don't really have any bad consequences if there's no suffering.
Sort of. So I would say that you can't hurt people without their consent. And so your choices can't affect people if they don't consent to it. But I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I mean, you can still be evil. You can still be Hitler and try to kill everyone you want. You're just not going to be able to because they're not going to consent to it. So he's still evil. He's still Hitler, but he's not going to be able to hurt anybody. So I don't think that's a problem. I think that would actually be a better world, not a worse world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds all well and good, and maybe it would be a better world if all it was like this world, if the afterlife wasn't a thing, or if according to Christianity, which I hold to. So I think that makes all well and good sense. Like if all that there is this world, then sure, like a world where there was less suffering would be inherently better. But if that suffering led to some more people getting into heaven, then I think there's more to it than that, I guess, if we're thinking about taking the afterlife into consideration.
Well, yeah, let's do that. Let's take the afterlife into consideration. Like for me, I think that even if there's a heaven, it makes no difference. Like for example, if you're going to be in high school for 4 years of your life or whatever, and in high school you're beat up by a bully. The fact that there's something after high school doesn't make the fact that you're beat up by a bully good or better. It's still wrong. Even if it's only a temporary wrong, it's still wrong. So if we look at the idea of this world I'm describing and then have heaven, or the world as it is now and then have heaven, the world I was describing and then heaven would still be morally superior to the world as it is now and then getting heaven. So if we compare the two worlds, the way God should have done it, the more moral way would be to give people a world without involuntary suffering and then let them choose to go to heaven. I actually think the idea of heaven and hell themselves are immoral. So if you're forcing someone to be in this world without their consent and to experience suffering without their consent, and then force them to go to heaven or hell without their consent, that itself is also immoral. I think you should be given the option to go to a universe of your own choosing, your own design, and that would be the moral option. So forcing someone into hell without their consent is immoral, and forcing someone into heaven without their consent is immoral. So I think that heaven and hell dichotomy is itself an immoral option. It seems to me like the better way the world could be would be God would give each individual the right to choose whether they want to be a part of the world, the earth, like this world, and go through all of the trials and tribulations that he has in order to go to heaven if they want to. Or you could say, like, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to go to this universe without involuntary suffering, and I can avoid heaven or just go to my own universe if I want to. That would be a much more moral way to build the world than to force people into this world and then force them to choose between heaven or hell without any free choice at all there. It seems like it'd be better just to give everyone the choice to go to their own universe or to be a part of God's design if they want to.
Yeah, and that's basically like, so a few things, like as far as hell goes, I definitely don't hold to eternal conscious torment. I don't think God torturing people makes any sense at all. I think that's just ridiculous. But so I almost do think it is like what you're saying. Like I think our choices and like the descriptions in the Bible, I think it's just like Jesus wants us to have a relationship with God, and they like paints that as such a wonderful thing and hell as such a horrible thing. But I'm starting to lean more towards either annihilationism or that like maybe hell isn't even all that bad. Like maybe people are just plenty happy there. They're just not in relationship with God. And I think God wants a family with him or whatever, does to have beings that he's in relationship with. But as far as the other people, they might just be, like you said, off doing their own thing, and there's some random universe where they get to do whatever they want. And maybe it's compared to heaven, it sucks, but I mean, or maybe it doesn't, I don't know. I think that's like, I think a lot of the ideas of hell are just,
Oh, right, right.
just,
I'm not saying
yeah.
like hell is bad here. I'm just saying, like, if I create a box, doesn't matter if it's a good box or a bad box or two boxes, heaven and hell, and I force someone to pick between the two boxes, I mean, that's less moral than just giving them the option to pick their own box. So it seems, so whatever hell is like, the fact that you're forced to go there instead of being given the freedom to go to wherever your own universe is or your own choices about what the world should be like is a less moral option. And so if there is an all good, all powerful God who's going to choose the most moral option, the most moral option seems to be give everyone the option to go to their own universe and not to hell.
Isn't it? But then yeah. So I'm like thinking about. So it's basically all hinges on this whole concept of like it's immoral to even like create someone in the first place without their consent, and that just sounds so odd to me. It seems like, I mean, God's omniscient, so he made it to a way that maybe everybody does choose. Maybe nobody would make that choice. It seems pretty odd to me that he would like you would ask somebody, "Do you want to exist?" and they would be like, "No."
All
I
right,
don't know.
I
That
don't
seems
think it's immoral to cause someone to exist, but it's immoral to forcing someone to do something after they exist. That's immoral.
yeah. I
So
mean,
I
I
don't
can
think there's
agree.
any immorality with causing someone to exist. That wouldn't
Okay.
follow with what I'm saying.
Well, you were saying like exist in this world with suffering, I guess,
Yeah, so it'd be
is
like
what's
you cause
immoral.
them to exist, that's totally fine, and then you force them into a box that you created that they have no choice in. That's the immoral part, it's the forcing them into the box that they have no choice in. It would be more moral to give them the option of, hey, design your own box. Or you could pick between the boxes I've chosen, or you could design your own box, or you could have like a combination or two, or go between back and forth. Like, I'm going to try out this one and be like, nah, I don't really like this world, and go back to this world.
Yeah, I mean that seems all well and good. It just doesn't seem like humans can create their own box. But I guess that's to
Well, yeah,
say
yeah, yeah.
that.
So I mean, by create my own box, I mean like God gives you an iPad with like the options of you can click it, and then like McDonald's or something, he completes your order and gives you the universe. Here you go, have fun.
Yeah, I mean that seems cool. I mean, shoot, I'd probably choose to live there too. That's probably why I play video games and whatnot. But
Yeah. I mean, I got a
yeah,
super chat question for you. Joshua White asked, if you had a button that in your hand that would erase all suffering in the world, would you push it?
yeah, like that from my yes, for sure. Like it seems pretty unreasonable for someone to say they wouldn't push it, but I completely understand the question, like because suffering can lead to more good than bad. So if I had all the knowledge of exactly what would happen when I push that button, maybe I wouldn't push it. But from my limited knowledge, it seems pretty easy to say that less suffering would be better.
Well, you said that suffering can cause greater good. Like, how so? Because from my perspective, giving someone the option to suffer, then they can suffer to get the greater good, is even better than just forcing them to suffer to get the good. So without the suffering, without involuntary suffering, we have an even greater good that the involuntary suffering doesn't provide. We have more goods without involuntary suffering, actually.
Yeah, this whole idea of like putting, and I've listened to a decent amount, but not like a ton. But this really like this idea of everything being voluntary seems, I don't know. I'm trying to like wrap my head around this idea better to respond. So I mean, I do agree. Like that sounds all well and good. If someone has the choice, like they could look into the future and be like, all right, this is going to be worth it. You know, like eating even just something stupid like eating this spicy food, like I'll enjoy this. You know, I'll have like a rush afterwards.
Yeah.
Seems better than like just taking a chance. Like, do I have to?
But
I don't
then
know
it's
if
going to
it's going
cause
to
you
be
to
spicy.
suffer like 8 hours later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I'm like, maybe repeat your question. I feel like I like got off track a little bit in my head.
Yeah. So you said that suffering allows greater goods to occur. And
Sometimes I'm not gonna
yeah,
say
yeah,
all
absolutely.
suffering does or
Absolutely.
whatever, but
So I'm saying that getting rid of involuntary suffering allows even more greater goods to occur. That it allows more greater goods than forcing people to suffer without consent. Because then you can choose to suffer and get the greater good from the suffering, but it's voluntary and not forced on people without their consent. So you can get all of the greater goods from suffering, but it's optional, which means it's an even greater good than just forcing people to suffer without their consent.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's like a few things. So I feel like nobody's ever gonna choose the suffering, like the extreme suffering. Like, I mean, somebody going through a death of a parent or whatever could like cause them to like. I mean, even I don't know. It's like weird as far as greater goods because like, how do you measure the amount of good? You know, like maybe just going through the death of your parent and then you're able to talk to someone else 10 years later and relate to that person, and you like stop them from committing suicide or something. Like maybe that's like this infinite amount of good. I don't know. So it just seems really speculative. Like when we're getting into this, I just think it's fair to say that some suffering causes greater goods, but then you're saying voluntary suffering would always. Yeah, I'm trying to really understand this idea because, like, would voluntary suffering always cause more greater goods than involuntary suffering? And I feel
Well,
like,
yeah, but take your example of the parent dying. So you have the option of living in a world where people can die, and you can choose to go into that world, and you know that your parents are going to die, and you experience the death of a parent, so you still have all of that suffering and sadness, and they're gone. But all of that was chosen. You weren't forced into that. So you still got that, and you still got the ability to relate to someone else who had their parent die. But instead of it being forced on you because you didn't choose to go to that world, you voluntarily chose to be a part of that world. So it seems like you can get all of the greater good from experiencing your parent die if you choose to be in a world like that. And additionally, it gives a greater good because you weren't forced to be there against your consent. So it seems to me like you get all that good plus an extra good, which is that you consented to this instead of being forced to do it against your will. So,
yeah,
so
I just
whatever,
feel
you
like,
said like if it was infinite good, whatever number, however good that is, you get that plus this other thing, which makes it even higher.
yeah, I just feel like no one would ever consent to anything bad happening to them, and then therefore there wouldn't be these greater goods. But
Well, I
maybe
know
that's
that
not
for a
true.
fact there is because we play video games. Like we choose
True.
to voluntarily incur suffering on ourselves when we turn the difficulty up on a video game. So we would definitely, there are people who would do that. And we know that there are scientists who like to experiment with those kinds of suffering all the time. Christopher Hitchens voluntarily was waterboarded. So people would definitely choose to be a part of the suffering. But whether or not they would or wouldn't choose, I don't think that makes a difference to the model. The question is which one is more moral? Giving people the option seems to be more moral.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be. I don't know. I really have to think about this whole idea of like consent with like everything. Like, obviously, consent is a good thing, but like consent to wake up in the morning or whatever seems like a strange thought. Hard to like wrap my head around.
Well, yeah, I would say you consent to sleep. So you consent to sleep and
But
wake
yeah,
up. So you consent to both at the same time, potentially. Yeah, I probably
but
wouldn't
like,
sleep
yeah,
ever. I'd be like,
we don't really consent to need sleep or get hungry.
yeah, I think we
But
should. I
like,
think it would
would
be
it be a
more
better
moral.
world if we could like choose? Like, I don't ever want to be hungry again.
Yes, that would be such a better world,
Yeah,
definitely.
I mean, I
Like I
agree.
choose to never get fat and eat all of the pizza I want. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds better to me. Yeah, so I'm not a Christian anymore. I need this world where I can choose.
Pizza, free pizza.
Yeah, pizza.
I just saw a meme on that on Facebook. I vote for the pizza, the free pizza.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, that's essentially why one of the reasons why I think I'm not a Christian is because the problem of suffering is definitely the big one.
yeah. I definitely think that's, like I said, I think that's the best objection to Christianity or any sort of religion, really. Because, I mean, it makes total sense that we would. It just. I mean, I think there are explanations, but I think if I ever were like if I ever were to become an atheist, it probably would be because of that reason for sure. Like, but I'm not the type of person that like I don't know. Things seem true to me, like I said, so I'm like holding to it until I'm not gonna change my mind on a whim, and I don't think anybody does. And it's like it's just a lot of thoughts too. Like, how much do we choose our beliefs and whatnot, and how much is just stuck there in our head because of brain chemistry or whatnot. So
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. Like again, I totally think that fideism is reasonable. I don't think there's any problem with choosing to believe because you feel it or you want to. That's totally fine. I mean, my only goal is to argue against bad arguments. Like I think that all the philosophical arguments that theists present are just terrible arguments. They don't work at all. Kind of like flat earthers. I see them kind of the same. And so I think that believing in really bad arguments is not a good thing, and we should fight against that. And then belief about in God, whether or not people believe in God makes no difference to me. I see no problem with belief in God at all.
yeah, I'm like I don't know where I stand on the whole philosophical arguments. Like, I enjoy learning about them and arguing them somewhat with people as I learn it, but we'll see where I come. I could definitely see myself in 10 years. Like, I was listening to Pete Enns on your show. Actually, I was like curious what he had to say. I could see myself at certain being very similar to him.
Oh yeah, I think his position is the most reasonable of all the theists I've talked to. I think definitely he's probably someone I think most theists should look up to and be like, that's a reasonable position.
Yeah, I agree. Just kind of like owns what he believes, and it just is what it is. Doesn't really feel the need to justify it. But he's not necessarily a fideist in the sense like when I hear fideist, I think of like someone who like knows that these arguments don't work at all or whatever. And I just haven't like I just wouldn't make that claim. Maybe they do work for some people, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that could be fair. Sure, you could just be agnostic about the arguments be working, or instead of just being like, yeah, I know that for sure they don't work.
Yeah, yeah. It almost just seems like agnostic as opposed to like atheist, like gnostic atheist, or however people. There's too many terms, but you know what I mean. I'm not like arguing about the definition of atheism, but
Yeah, for
like
sure. Because yeah, I don't think there's a lot of value in arguing against definitions. I think that you just pick whatever definition you want, and as long as I can understand what you're saying, I'm just going to grant whatever definition you're using.
yeah, I think that argument like holds some weight, like the whole definition of atheism, but not like the way some people do it. I do not care in the least how someone uses. Like I've heard you say too, like words. I think words just have uses where I could be like, I'm a Christian, and by that I mean there is no God, and then we could continue our conversation.
Yeah, pretty much.
But like I think philosophically, like I think there are some issues with like the whole like a lack of belief, atheist, where I think it just to me it makes more sense to like have three categories: atheist, agnostic, theist, or whatever. But whatever, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's not that important.
Yeah, and I'm just part of a Discord server, and we argue about random things, and
Yeah,
that was
yeah, me too. That's my
yeah,
Discord server. If somebody asked, are you pretty familiar with the Bible? Have you read it cover to cover?
yeah, yeah.
They asked about Ezekiel 20. Was it evil for God to demand human sacrifice in Ezekiel 20?
As far as like individual passages in the Old Testament, like I'm definitely not. Have I read it? Yes. Do I know what we're talking about? I'm pretty sure. But would I be? I mean, I'm pretty sure. Basically, the argument I would give is that somehow, out of context, God did not actually demand a child sacrifice, and whether or not, I don't want to like get into the specific passage because I think it's just there's a lot more context than I probably want to get into right here. But if I've come to the conclusion that like it was flat out clear that God commanded child sacrifice, then I would probably have to come to the conclusion that somewhere the Old Testament something this isn't really what God commanded, because I don't believe God could command child sacrifice. So if anything, it would just change my thoughts on the reliability or inspiration of the Old Testament or something along those lines. But I just think more than likely with context, it doesn't say that. But
Do you have it up? Do you like Google? I don't know what it is.
yeah,
So.
I actually do have it up right now. So where are we at? Ezekiel 20. Does it have a verse?
No, it just says 20.
Because it's like a really long.
Rembrandt, what verse? 20
Yeah,
what?
I mean, there's like 49 verses, and I'm like skimming
2030.
through.
2030.
Therefore, I say to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, will you defile yourselves after the manner of your fathers and go whoring after their detestable things? When you present your gifts and offer up your children in fire, you defile yourselves with the idols of the day. I mean, it basically just says like when it seems to me like God's saying when people do these things, it's horrible. Like it doesn't seem like he's telling them to do them.
I haven't read the Bible in a long time. I read it cover to cover twice a long time ago, but
I've
kind of
never
lost
read it
interest.
like just started in Genesis and read through Revelation, but
Actually,
I
my
have.
parents paid me to do that. They're like, "We'll pay you this much money per chapter or whatever." I'm like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah. So there may be like random chapters in like Deuteronomy that I haven't read or something, but I've read the whole, for the most part, I've read the whole Bible.
Marique
But yeah,
Kaiser asked Nathan if he thinks that everyone knows that God exists. Do you think everyone knows that God exists?
I think in a sense, but I'm definitely not the type of person that like goes around telling people like you just hate God and you're fooling yourself or anything. Like I think it seems to me like there's justified people who are not lying to themselves that aren't convinced that God exists. That I believe that there's what's the like the word they use in the find hiddenness argument. It's like a rational,
Disbelief?
yeah, or a non-resistant non-belief. That's what I'm getting. I think those people exist for sure.
Yeah, because there's the pre-suppers who think everyone knows that God exists, and
Yeah,
you're
I'm
just
not.
you're just ignoring your feelings. You're lying to yourself.
Yeah, like Romans 2 or Romans 1, whatever, where it says everyone knows that God exists. And I think in a sense, like you can know maybe or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe some people legitimately don't know, and I don't know what happens to those people. I don't believe that you go to hell just because you like were stupid or something.
Didn't the Pope actually just come out and say atheists can go to heaven?
Yeah, I've actually heard that, and I actually somewhat believe it. Like I think maybe you get. I think if you honestly are seeking the truth, where you like die and get confronted with Jesus standing right there, and you can legitimately say to him like, "I would have believed if I were convinced," and he would know that, and I think you're fine. Like I think it's just more of a question of look in yourself and just be honest with yourself, because there are some people that probably are lying to themselves, that believe in God and like they had a bad experience in church or whatever, so they just like are hateful or whatever. I'm not saying there's very many, but there may be one or two. Or, what I mean? There could be those people.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's reasonable. I think it's always been weird that uh, it requires you to believe in Jesus to go to heaven. That's always a weird thing. Like it should be like a more reasonable principle. Like as long as you genuinely sought the truth and were a good person, then you should go to heaven. Like I'm a
Yeah, and
big fan of
like
Buddhism.
yeah, I'm told like that's like the type part of theology that I'm like really trying to study, because I agree. Like I think everything. I think it's reasonable to say that like Jesus was God incarnate, came down to heaven, and no one gets to heaven except for what he did. But I don't think that idea follows to no one gets to heaven except for believing in like this certain name or this certain person, or like I think there's people of all kinds that are just confused on the details. I think there's only one right answer. I'm not a universalist in the sense that like all roads lead to God or whatever different ways. I don't think that, but I think there's plenty of people who have they're confused about the actual facts or whatever, but when confronted with the truth, they're like, "Oh, that I would have believed that if that's how I understood it."
Yeah, that makes sense. We got another question. Ask him who the prime mover is. Do you accept those like Thomistic prime mover kind of things?
That's like the some philosophical arguments I do agree with the most. That's the ones I'm really looking into more as far as like contingency and whatever, all those Thomistic arguments. I like Edward Fazer, who's like a modern day Thomist.
Yeah, he is like the modern day Thomas. His Five
Yeah.
Ways book. Yeah, I disagree with him, but yeah, I think that the contingency argument is probably the best argument for a God, where we think that there just has to be some fundamental ground of reality in some way. I totally agree with that. I just don't think it has to be conscious for any reason.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn like how, because I agree, it doesn't seem like there needs to be consciousness or love, or justice or something, but somehow like that's just part of it. I haven't studied enough yet, and we'll see. I mean, maybe I'll come to the conclusion that yeah, that is crazy. But
Yeah, and then he asks, you believe the prime mover is Christianity because of just how it resonates with your feelings, I think is what you said earlier.
but essentially, it's just like when I read the Bible and read the story of Jesus, like nothing else seems as true as that has. And just the idea too, and it's not like what I would use to convince, but just looking back and seeing like the effect that Christianity has had on the world, just I mean, honestly, it seems like something I wanted to be a part of, essentially. Not like the bad things. Yeah, there's bad things, but there's also like just this thread of like love and community and whatnot that's been there for so long that seemed true. And it's like, man, if this is true, and almost like the more I thought about it, almost like choosing a sports team or whatever, I felt like when I first became a Christian. And then like now it just seems more true. And maybe that's a horrible way to come to belief, like a horrible epistemology is just like make a choice and then like confirmation bias your way to the end or whatever. And that's almost sounds like what I'm saying, but I think if that thing's right, I don't know. It's just we'll see. We'll see how I feel. I definitely haven't nailed down my epistemology or anything like that. So
Yeah, it's
if what
perfectly
I'm saying
reasonable to
is,
always be like, I'm not sure, I'm still thinking about it. Like that's a good, reasonable position to have.
yeah, that's kind of what I feel like. Like if I could come to the conclusion in a few years from now, I look back at this like, man, this guy was an idiot. But
Yeah, that's something that we YouTubers face all the time. We go back and see our videos from 2 years ago, like, oh God, I can't believe I said that. No.
yeah, especially you do this like every day.
Yeah, I try to as far as I can. Need those monies, those views. Oh, and by the
Yeah.
way, people in the chat, just in case you didn't notice, I got approved for YouTube membership. So there's a join button down there. It's like opportunity to pay me money for some reason. I don't know why they gave me that. Like you need like 10,000 subs to qualify for that. I have like 3,500, but they allowed me to have it for some reason. And so awesome. You get cool little emojis and stuff. You can put a picture of my chair up there and show how awesome you are. Also, it'll
Nice.
make Dark Dawkins cry. It makes
Oh, nice,
Dark
yeah.
Dawkins cry, so everyone should just sub now.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess you get a lot of like consistent views on the live streams, where it might be why.
Yeah, maybe. I have no idea. It was weird. I just got a notification one day like, "Hey, you can activate this thing. Click this button." I'm like, "Okay, button press."
Well,
Yeah, it
everybody in the
was.
chat should subscribe to my channel too while they're at it, because
Yeah,
what am I?
subscribe to Spartan Theology channel. What
Yeah, I'm
is
like
it?
123 subscribers now.
Oh yeah,
Big
so do you
money.
have your custom like YouTube URL? So it's just youtube.com/Spartan Theology.
No, I don't have the URL. I think you have to have like 1,000 subscribers.
Oh, really? I thought it was
Yeah,
100 for the custom URL and then 1,000 for monetization.
I tried to do it not too long ago. It didn't work, but whatever. I'll look at it after this. But
Yeah, they could have changed this. They increase the requirements all the time. Like I was just about to get monetization, or I had monetization on my gaming channel, and like for like a week, and then they just bumped it up to require you with that to have 1,000 subs. I'm like, oh my God, I hate you. I got $3 in like the few days I had it.
yeah, stingy, stingy.
Hmm. Oh, awesome. Do you have any like other
Yeah, I
apologists?
feel like I don't know. I really want like I figured maybe we would touch on like epistemology, but it's not something I've studied enough. I can't really hold too much. I'm very interested in like your way of thing. Just the way you say like if it does whatever proves shows that it's imaginary or real. Like I'm interested in learning about that, but yeah, I haven't studied enough to really hold too much of a conversation about it.
That's reasonable. Yeah. So I got a question from Sean Kelly. How do you think the idea of incentivized belief relates to honesty? Like, Does the statement, if you believe in X, I will give you Y, necessarily represent motivated self-deception? Um, Not necessarily. I mean, I think that if you're a rational person, you can probably realize that you're motivated to believe that because of the incentive and then try to assess the evidence independently. I don't think it necessitates that, but there's definitely a motivation in humans to want to believe something that gives them a result, for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of our beliefs are based on emotions for sure. So, like for anyone to say they're unbiased or whatever seems ridiculous. So, I mean, if you say like you can see the some of the emotional motivation in a certain belief or whatever, that doesn't mean all your other beliefs probably have emotions behind them too. So,
For sure. Yeah, the one of the big things one of the arguments I actually kind of like is Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, which says that evolution isn't perfect, so it selects for survivability rather than truth. And we know that's true because of evolution selects for fallacies and biases and delusions all the time. Human beings have hundreds of those. So we know it's definitely true that evolution doesn't select for truth all the time, which is again one of the reasons that I think we believe in religion is because of the one of the big ones, type 1, type 2 errors. Like if we see a Russell in the bushes, it's probably we think it's a lion and then run away. Those people survived, and if you thought it wasn't a lion and stayed there, you got eaten. So we descended from the ones who thought, "Hey, Russell in the bushes is a lion," and that's why we have that proclivity to believe things that of agency is behind things that may not have agency.
so wouldn't that kind of lead to like the idea of religion at least being like a positive thing though, like
Oh
something
yeah, for
maybe we
sure.
should.
Definitely, religion has had a lot of positive impacts in humanity for a very long time. It motivated people to keep living and to unify together into groups much quicker and more reliably than essentially any other kind of system that humans came up with. So it was a very effective methodology in order to group people together and to get them to motivate to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do, far more so than pretty much any other ideology we came up with. And so it was extremely effective and beneficial for humanity throughout most of history.
Yeah, so it's almost like yeah, so but that doesn't mean it's true or not true for sure. It's not.
Yeah.
So
Frank
it's like, do
asked,
you yeah, go ahead.
yeah, Frank asked, like, does the fear of hell motivate you? Because you said you don't see hell as like a
No.
pain thing. That's like the
No, not at all. I'm not afraid of hell. I don't think like I think if God exists then he has to be good and I don't think any good God can send someone to hell unjustifiably. So if hell is even real, like eternal conscious torment, then if I'm there, then I like ultimately deserved it or whatever. Like it's not something I think I'm gonna make a bad choice or whatever. And dang, I messed up. I'm in hell.
yeah, yeah. That's like a weird way to think about hell.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I made a mistake. I dropped the cup, and now I'm in
Yeah,
hell.
exactly. Like I should have chose B instead of A. It's just that's not the way it works out. So if it's like ultimately like perfectly justified for me to be there, then I don't think anyone's complaining. They might like not want to. I don't know. I just don't think it's like a place you feel unfair for being there. I think sort of like C.S. Lewis idea too. Like hell is locked from the inside.
Yeah, like I think that's a more poetic way to understand hell than the like fire and brimstone quotes from Jesus. I think.
Yeah, and I don't think like that. I think that idea, like the whole exile, C.S. Lewis, that's more of like a philosophical. I don't think you get that from scripture, and that's why I lean more towards like annihilationism. I think is like the most reasonable, both philosophically and scripturally based belief of hell. But like I said, I don't think Jesus or and the Bible is clear on the afterlife at all.
Yeah, I don't think the Bible's clear on anything to be honest. Like, that's the atheist position. So
Yeah, that
Tyler
makes sense.
Walston asked, I love fantasy and sci-fi, so I'm not emotionally biased against the magic supernatural, just disappointed we can't show the true claims from the false. Is that a case of bias against? No, I don't think that would be a case of bias against. I agree. I think magic and the supernatural would be really cool, and I would like it to exist for sure. But I agree. The reason I just don't believe in it is because there's no evidence.
Yeah, and I mean, shoot, I always thought Harry Potter was cool growing up and everything. I'd love for that stuff to be cool, but that doesn't lead me to like, I'm not like a charismatic Christian or I don't think there's like miracles happening every day or anything like that. Like, I'm very skeptical when it comes to those things too. So,
Yeah, that's one of the big contention points in theology is like, do miracles actually occur? Because there's like that Craig Keener 1,000-page 2-book thing that says all these miracles occur, but then when we like test them scientifically, it's they usually come up false and negative. Like I think the Templeton Foundation, which is a big Christian organization, did a bunch of prayer studies and found they just didn't work or had negative results in some cases.
Yeah, that Craig Keener book, like, I think is like the worst thing that's ever happened, because I think every Christian like finds out that this book exists and then just tells atheists like, "What, you haven't read this like 50,000 page book? Like, you have to shut up," when they've like never even seen it in their life.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things atheists say is they do that with the Bible too. Like a lot of Christians haven't read the Bible, and say, "Well, you need to read the Bible." Well, they tell it to atheists all the time. Like, oh my god.
Yeah. I mean, at least the Bible, like at least maybe the Christians have at least studied parts of it or whatnot. But the Craig Keener book is one that kills me. I swear, so many Christians literally like, "Oh, there's this huge book that exists," and like, I swear it could just be Dr. Seuss inside, and most Christians wouldn't know.
Probably, yeah. Well, it was. I think we've been going for almost an hour. I think we're like 10 minutes short or whatever. But yeah, it was a great conversation. I
Yeah,
really
this
enjoyed
was
having
pretty
you on.
cool. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This was cool. I think like I'd love to come on again. Maybe actually like bring an argument or something.
Yeah, for sure.
But I just thought this would be a chill conversation. It definitely was. So
Yeah, it's
cool.
all
Well,
right.
yeah.
We have a bunch of those like that. I talked with Paulogia about Star Wars movies, and
Oh,
Aaron
nice.
Ra. We talked about nuclear power plants. He's against nuclear power. Like,
Okay, I've always thought like nuclear power, well, to me, it's like the best
yeah, it is.
option we have.
It's like
But
the safest thing given all of the options. But Aaron is a little skeptical of nuclear power.
okay, yeah, and I like Paul G. He's probably one of my favorite atheist channels, just because he craps on Ken Ham a lot, and
Yeah, I love
anybody
that.
that does that, I'm a fan of.
Well, anyway, I'm gonna get something to eat.
Yeah,
It's starting to get late here, so it was great talking with you. I'd love to talk
yeah, it
again
was
sometime.
cool. Well, I thank you for having me on, and